The ship landed with barely a sound on the red Arizona soil. Its smooth silver hull caught the morning sunlight, sending reflections dancing across the research station's windows. As the airlock opened, scientists gathered to witness the arrival of their first alien visitor. Lyra stepped out, her blue-tinged skin glistening with a thin layer of protective moisture. She blinked her large, dark eyes against the harsh sunlight. Earth's dry air immediately began pulling at her skin, an uncomfortable sensation she'd been warned about but couldn't fully prepare for. "Welcome to Earth," said Dr. Marcus Reed, stepping forward as the station's lead researcher. His voice was professional but cool. "I trust your journey was acceptable." Lyra nodded, attempting the human gesture she had practiced. "Thank you. The journey was fascinating. Your solar system has remarkable features." Her translator device made her words sound slightly mechanical, but clear. Dr. Reed nodded stiffly. "Let me show you to your quarters. We've modified the environment to better suit your needs." As they walked through the station, Lyra felt the stares of the human scientists. Some looked curious, others wary. She understood their caution. Her people, the Valenians, came from a water-covered world with only small islands of land. To them, Earth's vast dry regions were as alien as space itself. "Your room has a moisture generator," Dr. Reed explained as they reached her quarters. "We've tried to make it comfortable, but please let us know if you need adjustments." "This is more than adequate," Lyra replied, seeing the cloudy mist filling the small room. "I appreciate your efforts." After Dr. Reed left, Lyra unpacked her few belongings. She placed a small crystal sphere on the desk, a piece of her ocean home. Inside it, tiny creatures from Valen's seas swam in endless circles. It was her reminder of why she had volunteered for this mission. The next morning, Lyra joined the research team for her first briefing. The room fell silent as she entered. "Today we begin our study of desert plant adaptation," Dr. Reed announced. "Lyra will be observing and contributing insights from her world's ecosystems." A younger scientist raised his hand. "No offense, but what could someone from an ocean planet possibly know about desert survival?" Lyra felt a flush of color change across her skin, the Valenian equivalent of blushing. "On Valen, we have coral systems that survive extreme pressure changes. Adaptation is universal, even if environments differ." Dr. Reed nodded slightly. "Different perspectives often lead to new discoveries. That's why the exchange program exists." Over the next few days, Lyra worked hard to prove her worth. She learned how Earth plants stored water, how animals survived the heat, and how the desert changed from day to night. The human scientists slowly warmed to her, impressed by her quick learning and unique insights. One evening, while watching the sunset turn the desert golden, Lyra found Dr. Reed standing nearby. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said. "Yes," he agreed, surprising her by continuing. "I wasn't sure you'd appreciate it. I thought you might find it too harsh." "Different doesn't mean worse," Lyra replied. "Your desert has its own kind of beauty, like an ocean of sand instead of water." Dr. Reed seemed to consider this. "Tomorrow we're tracking a rare desert bloom deeper in the Sonoran. Plants that sleep for years, then flower all at once after rain. Would you like to join us?" Lyra's skin rippled with excitement. "I would be honored." As she returned to her room that night, Lyra felt a growing connection to this strange dry world. She didn't know that the desert she was beginning to admire would soon become her greatest challenge, and that her survival would change how two worlds understood each other. The coming dawn would bring an adventure she wasn't prepared for, in a land that showed no mercy to those who underestimated it. Morning came with a burst of heat that startled Lyra awake. Outside her window, the desert already shimmered under the rising sun. Today was the day of the expedition to see the rare desert bloom. "Ready for your first real taste of Earth wilderness?" asked Tara, the team's desert guide. She was loading supplies into their rugged transport vehicle, a six-wheeled rover designed for harsh terrain. "I believe so," Lyra replied, helping to carry equipment. Her protective bodysuit felt tight around her blue-tinged skin, designed to keep moisture in and heat out. These flowers must be special to travel so far. Dr. Reed joined them, checking a tablet with weather reports. The night bloomers are a phenomenon that happens once every few years. Scientists still don't fully understand what triggers it across such a wide area simultaneously. Tara grinned. Some locals say the desert comes alive to remind us who's really in charge. Lyra found this idea fascinating. On her world, the ocean sometimes glowed with similar mystery. As they drove away from the research station, the landscape changed dramatically. Buildings disappeared, replaced by endless stretches of sand, rock, and hardy plants that somehow survived in this dry world. Lyra pressed her face to the window, amazed by the alien beauty. "Those are saguaro cacti," Dr. Reed explained, pointing to tall plants with arms reaching skyward. "They can live for 200 years and store enormous amounts of water. Like living reservoirs," Lyra said with wonder. "On Valen, we have floating algae that serve similar purposes." The rover climbed over rocky hills and down into dry riverbeds. Hours passed as they ventured deeper into the wilderness, far from any human settlement. The temperature inside the vehicle kept rising despite the cooling system. "We'll reach the bloom site by evening," Tara announced, expertly navigating around a boulder. "The flowers open at sunset and close again by morning." Perfect timing. Lyra felt excitement mixing with growing discomfort. Earth's sun was stronger than she had expected, and she could feel her body working hard to maintain moisture. She discreetly adjusted her suit settings, increasing the humidity level. Dr. Reed noticed. "Are you all right? We can turn back if needed." "I'm fine," Lyra insisted. "This is why I came to Earth, to experience new environments firsthand." By mid-afternoon, the rover crested a hill, revealing a vast basin below. Even from a distance, they could see patches of green where there should have been only brown and red. "There it is," Tara said proudly. "Desert's secret garden." They parked on a ridge overlooking the basin and began unloading equipment. Lyra helped set up monitoring devices, while Dr. Reed prepared sample collection tools. The sun beat down mercilessly, and Lyra felt increasingly lightheaded. "Maybe you should wait in the rover," Dr. Reed suggested, noticing her slowed movements. "No, I want to help," she insisted. "I'll just drink some more water." As sunset approached, they made their way down into the basin. The first flowers were already beginning to open, delicate white blooms with yellow centers emerging from what had looked like dead plants. "It's beautiful," Lyra whispered, kneeling to examine one. They were just waiting for the right moment. Suddenly, Tara looked up at the sky with concern. That wasn't in the forecast. Dark clouds were gathering on the horizon, moving quickly toward them. The wind picked up, sending dust swirling around their feet. "Sandstorm," Dr. Reed said sharply. "We need to get back to the rover now." They hurriedly gathered their equipment, but the storm moved faster than expected. Within minutes, the air filled with swirling sand, reducing visibility to almost nothing. "Stay together," Tara shouted over the howling wind. "Follow me." Lyra struggled to keep up, her suit's external sensors failing in the harsh conditions. The sand stung her exposed face, and panic began to rise in her chest. This was nothing like the storms on her water world. As the three researchers fought their way back toward the rover, a powerful gust knocked Lyra off her feet. She tumbled down a small slope, losing sight of the others in the blinding sand. "Dr. Reed." "Tara," she called, but her voice was swallowed by the roaring storm. The desert had separated her from safety, and its test was just beginning. The sandstorm raged through the night. Lyra huddled against a large rock, the only shelter she could find in the blinding chaos. Sand worked its way into her protective suit through tiny tears caused by her fall. Each grain felt like a burning needle against her sensitive skin. When morning finally came, the storm had passed, leaving an altered landscape in its wake. Dunes had shifted, landmarks disappeared. Lyra stood on shaking legs, scanning the horizon for any sign of the rover or her companions. Nothing. Just endless desert stretching in all directions. Dr. Reed. Tara. Her calls echoed briefly before being swallowed by the vast emptiness. No response came. Lyra checked her equipment with growing dread. Her communication device had been damaged in the fall, its screen cracked and unresponsive. The emergency beacon that should have activated automatically showed only a blinking red light instead of the steady green it was supposed to display. Worse, her environmental suit was compromised. The moisture retention system that kept her Valenian physiology functioning was failing. A warning light pulsed on her wrist monitor, showing dangerously low humidity levels. "Stay calm," she whispered to herself. "Assess the situation logically." She took inventory of what she had. A small water container, now half empty, a basic toolkit attached to her belt, a sample collection bag with some scientific instruments, and the damaged suit she wore. Not much for survival in Earth's harshest environment. The sun climbed higher, its heat intensifying by the minute. Lyra's skin, evolved for a water-rich world, began to dry painfully. Her people could survive brief periods in dry conditions, but nothing like this desert. Without her suit functioning properly, dehydration would progress far faster for her than for a human. She needed to find water soon. Using the sun's position, Lyra tried to determine which direction the research station might be. But the storm had disoriented her completely. Was the station east? West? She had no way to know. Think scientifically, she told herself. Water flows downhill. She studied the terrain and spotted what looked like a dry river in the distance. Where water had once flowed, it might flow again, or at least remain closer to the surface. Moving was agony. Each step sent waves of dizziness through her. The Earth gravity, slightly stronger than Valen's, made her body work harder than usual. Sweat, a strange bodily function her people rarely experienced, began to form on her blue skin, quickly evaporating in the dry air and taking precious moisture with it. By midday, Lyra reached the river. It was bone dry. She collapsed onto her knees, despair threatening to overwhelm her. "No, I won't give up." She pulled out a small drill-like tool from her kit. On Valen, scientists used it to take core samples from coral reefs. Here, she would try something different. With trembling hands, she began drilling into the river. 6 inches down, nothing but dry sand. A foot down, the same. But at nearly 2 feet, the sand darkened slightly. Moisture. Lyra worked faster, ignoring her cracking skin and blurring vision. At 3 feet, she hit clay, damp clay. Not enough water to drink, but enough to prove she was on the right track. She crawled along the river, looking for signs of deeper water. Vegetation, even dead plants, might indicate where water lasted longest. After an hour of painful searching, she spotted it, a cluster of dry bushes with slightly greener stems than the surrounding plants. Using her remaining strength, Lyra dug beneath them. The soil grew damper. Finally, at nearly 4 feet down, a small pool of muddy water appeared. It wasn't much, barely enough to fill her small container, but it was life. As she carefully scooped the precious liquid, Lyra heard a distant rumble. At first, she thought it might be another storm. Then she realized. Aircraft. A search party. She tried to stand, to wave, to signal somehow, but her weakened body betrayed her. She could only watch as the distant speck moved across the sky, too far away to see her small form against the vast desert. The sound faded. She was truly alone now. Night would come soon, bringing cold as deadly as the day's heat. Her damaged suit couldn't regulate temperature properly anymore. Without shelter, without proper water, without functioning equipment, Lyra faced the brutal truth. The desert showed no mercy, not even to visitors from the stars. The desert night fell like a stone, bringing cold that bit through Lyra's damaged suit. Shivering, she remembered her training at the Valenian Science Academy. Adapt or perish was their motto for fieldwork on alien worlds. "I will adapt," she whispered, her breath visible in the frigid air. First, she needed shelter. The small hollow where she'd found water offered minimal protection. Looking around in the moonlight, Lyra spotted a cluster of large rocks nearby. They would block the wind and might retain some heat from the day. Working methodically despite her exhaustion, Lyra gathered dried desert plants and piled them between two rocks, creating a crude nest. She placed smaller stones around the edges to trap warmth. It wasn't much, but it was better than exposure. Next came her suit problem. The tears letting precious moisture escape needed fixing. Lyra examined the sample collection bag she carried. Made of a flexible, waterproof material, it could be repurposed. Using a small laser tool designed for cutting geological specimens, she carefully cut patches and applied them to the worst tears in her suit. "Not perfect, but functional," she said, assessing her handiwork. As she worked, Lyra noticed something strange happening to her fingers. The usually smooth blue skin was becoming slightly rougher, with tiny ridges forming. On Valen, this occasionally happened to deep-sea divers who spent too long at extreme depths, a temporary adaptation. But here, on dry land, fascinating. She settled into her makeshift shelter as complete darkness enveloped the desert. The stars above were brighter than she'd ever seen them, with no moisture in the air to dim their light. Somewhere among them was Valen, her water-covered home. "Different worlds, different challenges," she murmured, recalling her professor's words. By morning, Lyra had a plan. She would follow the dry riverbed, moving only during early morning and evening to avoid the worst heat. Her scientific knowledge would be her greatest tool. She began walking at dawn, using her sample container to collect morning dew from rocks and plants, a technique she'd read about but never needed until now. Every drop was precious. Hours into her journey, Lyra spotted movement ahead, a small, scaly creature darting between rocks. Earth wildlife. She followed cautiously, remembering that animals always knew where to find water. The lizard led her to a small cluster of barrel-shaped plants. Cacti, she recalled from her Earth biology studies. Water storage organs. With careful precision, Lyra used her cutting tool to slice into one cactus. Clear, slightly sticky liquid oozed out. She collected it in her container, then tasted a tiny amount. Not pure water, but her body could process it. "Thank you," she said to the departed lizard, drinking the liquid slowly. By mid-morning, the sun's intensity forced Lyra to stop. She found shade beneath an overhanging rock and dozed fitfully. In her half-sleep, she noticed more changes to her body. Her skin, normally requiring constant moisture, had developed a thin, almost waxy coating that seemed to slow water loss. Impossible, she thought. Valenians didn't adapt this quickly. Yet here was evidence that they could, under extreme stress. Was this knowledge lost to her people after generations on their water world? Had ancient Valenians once visited drier planets and developed these dormant abilities? When evening came, Lyra continued her journey with renewed determination. Her scientific mind raced with possibilities. If she survived, this discovery alone would revolutionize Valenian understanding of their own biology. The riverbed eventually widened, suggesting it carried more water when it flowed. Logic dictated she was heading toward a larger water source, perhaps an oasis or seasonal lake. As night fell again, Lyra climbed a rocky outcrop to survey the terrain ahead. In the distance, something reflected moonlight, too regular to be natural. A structure. Hope surged through her weakened body. Human or abandoned. A structure meant shelter, possibly water, maybe even communication. The desert had tested her, forced her to adapt in ways she never imagined possible. Her blue skin was darker now, tougher. Her large eyes had developed a protective film. Her body was changing, evolving to meet Earth's challenge. Lyra looked toward the distant structure. Tomorrow, she would reach it or die trying. The desert showed no mercy, but neither did she. We should have found her by now. Dr. Reed slammed his fist against the side of the rover, frustration evident in every line of his face. 3 days had passed since the sandstorm separated them from Lyra, and each hour decreased her chances of survival. Tara adjusted the search drone's settings, her usual confidence replaced by grim determination. Valenians can't survive these conditions for long without support. Her suit was designed for short exposures, not days in the desert. She's smart, smarter than most humans I've worked with, Dr. Reed said, scanning the horizon through binoculars. The endless waves of sand and rock revealed nothing. Their radio crackled to life. Base to search team. Any sign of the alien? Dr. Reed grabbed the radio. Nothing yet. We need more drones, more searchers. A pause followed. Command is questioning the resource allocation. They're suggesting we scale back the search. What? Dr. Reed's voice rose sharply. She's out there because of us. Because I approved this expedition. The military liaison says one alien researcher isn't worth endangering more human lives. The temperature's climbing to record highs today. Tara took the radio from Reed's shaking hand. Tell Command that if they abandon her, the Valenian government will reconsider Earth's membership in the Galactic Cooperative. How's that for resource allocation? It wasn't entirely true. Tara had no idea how the Valenians would respond, but the bluff might buy them time. The voice on the radio sounded uncertain. I'll relay your concerns. Continue the search for now. Dr. Reed gave Tara a grateful look. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We still need to find her. Tara pointed to the drone's screen. The storm shifted everything. That basin where we saw the flowers, it's completely different now. They climbed back into the rover, pushing deeper into the desert. The vehicle's cooling system struggled against the brutal heat. Outside, the temperature had reached 118 degrees Fahrenheit, deadly for humans, potentially fatal within hours for a Valenian. At midday, they stopped to replace the drone's batteries. Dr. Reed stared at a sample case containing one of the rare flowers they'd collected before the storm. She was so excited about these, he said quietly. I was dismissive at first. Thought, what could an alien from a water planet teach us about Earth? And? Tara asked, calibrating the drone's sensors. She noticed patterns in the bloom cycle that we missed. Connected it to solar radiation levels, not just rainfall. She was right. He closed the case gently. Now she might die because I underestimated the dangers. The drone launched back into the sky, its cameras scanning the vast terrain methodically. As it disappeared over a ridge, Tara checked their water supplies. We've got enough for another day out here. Then we need to head back. Dr. Reed nodded grimly. Let's make it count. By late afternoon, exhaustion and heat had taken their toll. The rover's thermometer showed 122 degrees Fahrenheit outside. Inside, despite cooling, they were both drenched in sweat. Wait, Tara said suddenly, pointing at the drone's monitor. What's that? A small, irregular heat signature appeared at the edge of the screen. Too small for a human, but distinct from the surrounding rocks. Could be an animal, Dr. Reed said, hope creeping into his voice despite his caution. Or a Valenian in a damaged suit, Tara replied, already turning the rover toward the reading. It's moving slowly, but it's moving. They drove recklessly fast over the rough terrain, bouncing painfully inside the vehicle. The heat signature grew stronger on their monitors as they approached. There, Dr. Reed shouted, pointing through the windshield. In the distance, a figure moved slowly between rocky outcroppings, even from afar. The blue-tinged skin was visible. It's her. It's Lyra. Tara accelerated, the rover kicking up clouds of dust. As they drew closer, they could see that something was wrong. Lyra's movement was strange, her normally graceful gait now awkward and stiff. Her skin had darkened substantially, and her shape seemed altered. What happened to her? Tara whispered. Dr. Reed grabbed the medical kit. I don't know, but she's alive. That's what matters. The rover skidded to a stop 30 feet from Lyra. As they jumped out into the blistering heat, She turned toward them. For a moment, they froze in shock. The alien girl they knew had changed. The desert had transformed her into something new, something that could survive in this merciless environment. The search was over, but the mystery was just beginning. Lyra. Dr. Reed approached cautiously, medical kit in hand. The being before him looked like Lyra, yet somehow different. Her once smooth blue skin had darkened to a deep indigo and developed a textured pattern similar to Earth reptiles. Her large eyes were now protected by a clear membrane that blinked sideways. Most striking were the ridges along her arms and neck, structures that hadn't existed before. Dr. Reed. Tara. Lyra's voice was raspy but recognizable. You found me. She swayed slightly, and they rushed forward to support her. As they touched her skin, both humans pulled back in surprise. You're cool, Tara said in wonder. How is that possible in this heat? Lyra touched her own arm, examining the changes with scientific curiosity despite her exhaustion. Adaptation. My body changed. I don't fully understand it yet. They helped her into the rover. Inside the cooled vehicle, Lyra winced as if the lower temperature caused discomfort. Are you in pain? Dr. Reed asked, scanning her with a medical device. Not exactly. It's adjustment. Lyra gestured to her altered form. This began after the first night. Small changes at first. Thickening skin, altered respiratory function, then faster changes. Dr. Reed's scanner beeped with results that made no sense. According to this, your cellular structure is completely different from your baseline readings. Valenian legends speak of ancient adaptive abilities. Lyra explained, accepting water but drinking only a small amount. Stories claimed our ancestors could survive anywhere. I thought they were myths. Tara started the rover, heading back toward the research station. Your people evolved on a water world. Why would you need desert adaptation abilities? Perhaps we didn't originate on Valen, Lyra suggested. Or maybe these abilities were engineered long ago, then forgotten as they became unnecessary. As they drove, Lyra described her ordeal. Finding water underground, extracting moisture from plants, surviving the extreme temperature shifts. With each passing hour in the rover, she seemed uncomfortable, almost restless. Your body temperature is rising, Dr. Reed noted with concern, checking the scanner again. We need to cool you down. No, Lyra said firmly. My body is fighting the changes. The pain comes from transformation, not heat. By nightfall, they were still hours from the research station. They stopped to rest, setting up emergency lighting around the rover. Under the artificial lights, Lyra's transformation became even more apparent. The ridges on her skin were developing into functional structures, heat radiators that worked like the fins of Earth's desert animals. Her breathing had slowed dramatically. Most surprisingly, small crystalline formations had appeared along her spine, catching and reflecting moonlight. It hurts, she admitted finally, curling into herself as another wave of changes racked her body. But it's necessary pain, like breaking something to heal it stronger. Dr. Reed watched helplessly. Is there anything we can do? Document everything. Lyra gasped through clenched teeth. This knowledge must be preserved, for both our peoples. Throughout the night, the transformation accelerated. Lyra's cries of pain eventually subsided into silence as her body found equilibrium with its new form. By dawn, she stood changed completely. Her new form was still recognizably Valenian, but adapted perfectly to desert life. The crystalline structures along her spine now formed a complete network across her back. Solar collectors, she explained, that converted sunlight directly into energy her body could use. I need less water now, Lyra said, her voice deeper than before. My cells have been reprogrammed to recycle moisture with nearly perfect efficiency. Tara shook her head in amazement. You're a walking evolutionary miracle. Evolution usually takes thousands of generations, Dr. Reed said, still scanning and documenting the changes. This is something else entirely. Lyra looked out at the desert, her transformed eyes seeing the landscape differently now, not as a threat, but as a home. The pain had been excruciating, but necessary. Her body had awakened ancient genetic programming, dormant for countless generations. The desert showed no mercy, she said quietly. So I became something that needs no mercy. As the sun rose over the horizon, Lyra stepped out of the rover's shadow into the full morning light. Her crystalline structures captured the sunlight, making her glow with absorbed energy. In the harshest trial Earth could offer, she had not just survived. She had transcended. The research station buzzed with activity as the rover approached. Word of Lyra's survival had reached them, but rumors of her transformation had been met with disbelief. Scientists, military personnel, and medical teams gathered outside, waiting to witness the impossible. When the rover doors opened, a collective gasp rose from the crowd. Lyra stepped out, her transformed body catching the sunlight. The crystalline structures along her spine and shoulders shimmered with stored energy. Her deep indigo skin, now textured with protective scales, seemed to pulse with life. "It's really her," whispered one scientist, recording everything on a tablet. Dr. Reed stood protectively beside Lyra. "She needs space and respect, not gawking. This is a scientific breakthrough, not a sideshow." The station director, a stern woman named Dr. Maxwell, pushed through the crowd. "We have orders to place the alien in quarantine immediately. These changes need to be studied under controlled conditions." "I am not a specimen," Lyra said, her nude voice carrying easily across the open space. "I am still a representative of the Valenian Science Council and a member of the Galactic Cooperative." A tense silence followed. Earth's recent admission to the cooperative was still fragile, dependent on good relations with established member worlds like Valen. "Of course," Dr. Maxwell backtracked quickly. "We simply have safety protocols. The only danger here is to your pride," Terra interrupted. While you were debating whether to continue the search, Lyra was discovering biological abilities your scientists can barely comprehend. Inside the medical center, Lyra submitted to basic examinations while refusing more invasive tests. The results confirmed what she already knew. Her DNA had been fundamentally restructured, activating dormant genetic sequences. "These adaptations shouldn't be possible," the medical director said, reviewing the scans, "especially not at this speed. Yet here I stand." Lyra replied simply. News of her transformation spread quickly beyond Earth. The Valenian Council requested immediate video communication. When Lyra's image appeared on their screens, the elder scientists fell into stunned silence. "The ancient adaptation," one finally whispered. The stories were true. Lyra learned that centuries ago, references to adaptive abilities had been dismissed as myths by Valenian scientists. Records mentioning these transformations were relegated to cultural archives rather than scientific study. Her experience would rewrite Valenian understanding of their own evolutionary history. A week after her rescue, representatives from the Galactic Cooperative arrived at the research station. They came not to investigate, but to celebrate what they called a rediscovery of profound importance. "Your experience proves that intelligent life is more adaptable than we believed," the cooperative's chief scientist told Lyra. "This changes how we approach colonization of new worlds." On the night before the officials departed, Lyra stood alone on the research station's observation deck, looking out at the desert that had nearly killed her. Dr. Reed joined her, carrying a small box. "The flower samples," he said, offering her the box. "The ones you were so excited about. They've been analyzed, and you were right. Their blooming cycle is tied to solar radiation patterns." Lyra took the box, her transformed fingers handling it delicately. Another small mystery solved. "What happens now?" Dr. Reed asked. "Will you return to Valen?" Lyra shook her head. "I've requested permanent assignment to Earth. My people need to understand these adaptations, and I need to be here to study them properly." She paused, looking out at the moonlit desert. "Besides, I've grown attached to this place." "It nearly killed you," Dr. Reed reminded her. And in doing so, it revealed what I truly am. She opened the box, revealing the dried desert flowers inside. These plants wait years for the right conditions to bloom. Perhaps my people have been waiting too, for the right challenge to awaken what sleeps within us. The next morning, a small ceremony was held. Earth was officially recognized as a training ground for the Galactic Cooperative, a world whose harsh environments could help other species discover their hidden potential. Lyra, once a visitor fighting for survival, became Earth's first permanent alien resident by choice. The desert that had shown no mercy had given her the greatest gift of all, the truth about herself and her people's forgotten past. As she stepped out into the Arizona sun, her transformed body perfectly at home in the heat, Lyra smiled. The harshest trial had become her greatest triumph. Sometimes, only through merciless challenge could true strength be found.